Got a good one for you today. We're dealing in what ifs and what might have been, what could have been. We're going to count down the top 8 lost records of the rock era. Records that have been, for various reasons, buried in the graveyard of rock and roll. We're going to talk about how one artist spent a fortune to physically destroy every single copy of his upcoming album because he actually believed it was straight up evil. And it was a huge mistake that he ever recorded, so he wanted it gone. Somehow a few copies survived. There's also the hard rock band who fired their producer over interior design issues in the studio. But the real problem was that he was a horrible fit for the band. And even though the album they recorded together actually exists, you're never going to hear it. Find out why. Plus, there's the story of the most epic unreleased rock song in history. It was shelved decades ago, but recent activity suggests that the legendary band behind it might finally give us the holy grail of rock and roll. Let's get into it. Hey, music junkies, Professor of Rock always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. You know, if you remember digging into the bottom of a newly opened cereal box to get that cheap toy at the very bottom, you're going to dig this channel of deep musical nostalgia. Man, I miss those days. Make sure you're subscribed below. Even if you think you are, you might not be. And make sure to like, share, and comment on this to keep this channel going. Today, we got another edition of our show, Records of the Lost Art. We haven't done one of these in a while. Great records that have been lost to time. Let's get right into it. All right, starting things off at number 8. It's an album that we actually did get, but there's a completely different version of it that actually exists, at least in part. But the master tapes are stashed away in a box, and I'm telling you, it's never going to see the light of day, I'll tell you. The band is Def Leppard, and the lost album is the Jim Steinman version of 1987's Hysteria. The 1984 collaboration between Def Leppard and producer Jim Steinman is one of rock's most ridiculously expensive disasters out there. Now, Mutt Lange was initially involved in the early stages of the Hysteria album after doing Pyromania, but due to conflicts over the album's direction, he was not the first to produce it. So the band turned to the man behind Meatloaf's Bat Outta Hell. But the collaboration was a train wreck from the very start. According to frontman Joe Elliott, Jim was a funny guy. He was very eccentric. But in that first meeting, we realized that Jim was in a completely different orbit than us. I got this uncomfortable feeling. Steinman's hands-off vibe-first approach was the polar opposite of Mutt Lange's meticulous production style. And on day one, the writing was already on the wall. That first afternoon, the guys were warming up with Don't Shoot Shotgun, just a riff and a part of the melody. There was no chorus yet. When they were done, though, Jim Steinman said, "Yeah, I think we got that one." They hadn't even tuned their instruments yet. The guys were like, what the hell's going on here? So throughout the sessions, Jim's sonic suggestions, like adding yes-style synth runs to the gritty Run Riot, that only deepened the divide. And it quickly became clear that Jim's theatrical instincts, they were the polar opposite of the band's street-level rock. The tension in the studio, that was further fueled by a massive lifestyle gap. You know, Steinman would roll in hours late most days after spending his nights writing Bat Outta Hell 2. And while the band was eager to work, Steinman was more interested in ordering banquets for lunch. Reportedly, one off everything from the menu, and then he would charge it to the band. It all finally hit the fan when Jim Steinman demanded an interior design makeover. Steinman insisted that the studio's control room carpet had to be replaced with a higher quality version before he could continue work. Joe Elliott snapped. He was pissed. And he told the band that they would change the producer before they would change the carpet. Steinman, he was fired soon after that. The partnership only lasted like 8 or 9 weeks. In the fall of '84, Def Leppard ended up paying him hundreds of thousands of dollars just to go away. As for the recordings, they were so mediocre, apparently, guitarist Phil Collen claimed they sounded worse than their original home demos. Jim Steinman's version of Hysteria would have likely included very different versions of Don't Shoot Shotgun, Run Riot, Animal, Women, Armageddon, Love and Affection, and also Gods of War. Later Hysteria tracks written after Simon's departure would have been off the table for this lost album, I think. There was Love Bites, the title song Hysteria, Rocket and Pour Some Sugar on Me. Those all came later. According to Joe Elliott, the band has a box of tapes marked Hysteria, the Steinman sessions, and he refuses to release it. He says, it's the worst bootleg you've ever heard, and you're not going to hear it. All right, in the number 7 spot, I got Sheryl Crow, who finished recording an entire album before her 1993 debut, Tuesday Night Music Club. A lot of people don't know this. Sheryl got her big break when she crashed an audition for Michael Jackson's Bad World Tour in 1987. Despite not being invited, she signed a clipboard and won the job of Jackson's primary backing vocalist. She performed I Just Can't Stop Loving You, the duet in front of millions, for 2 years. Sheryl Crow also sang backup for Don Henley, who gave her very high praise. He said she's one of the best female singers there is right now, period, bar none. High praise coming from Henley. With Crow's newfound industry connection, she secured a deal with A&M Records in 1991, and the label paired her with Hugh Padgham, a longtime Phil Collins and the Police producer. And, she was paired to create a slick, high-budget pop record. In 1992, Sheryl stood on the precipice of stardom. However, the finished record was apparently a complete sonic mismatch for the singer-songwriter. Instead of the gritty, rootsy storyteller that we know today, the label attempted to mold Sheryl Crow into a high-gloss pop princess. The result was a collection of songs that were so overproduced that Sheryl Crow spiraled into a deep depression, eventually convincing A&M Records to scrap the entire project just weeks before it was supposed to hit the shelves. Said Sheryl Crow, and I quote, "First record was really slick. I was so unhappy. I felt like I was being made into something that I truly wasn't." Sheryl was just days away from releasing this $200,000 self-titled debut when she pulled the plug. The move almost ended her career before it even started. Somehow she convinced the label to scrap the finished record and let her start all over. But the decision to bury the record, that came at a high cost, staggering. It left Sheryl Crow as a debtor to her own dream. Because the production fees and marketing prep for the shelved 1992 album had already been spent. So Sheryl Crow began her official career in a deep financial hole. Luckily, Tuesday Night's Music Club became a big hit. All I Want to Do went to number 2 on the Hot 100, and it went top 10 around the world. Sheryl Crow, of course, followed that up with the number 5 hit Strong Enough. Let's have some fun. I got a feeling. Are you strong enough to... But even with those hits, she didn't see money for a little bit. Instead, her early royalty checks were diverted to pay back the ghost of the album that never was. In the decades since, though, the lost debut has become a cult relic. Bootleg copies of the 92 sessions have circulated online, giving Crow's self-titled debut a new digital afterlife. If she definitely didn't want that, I don't think. You can actually find the album on YouTube and judge whether she made the right move. Here's a little sample of the tracks that the world missed out on. It sounds very much like that strange late 1989 to early 1991 sound that colored the beginning of the 90s, before Nirvana and the alternative explosion, grunge. But the erasure of the 1992 album may be one of the most dramatic career-saving pivots in rock history. Looking back, had Crow released the record, she likely would have been dismissed as just another corporate pop act and likely forgotten quick. But by taking the career mulligan, Sheryl Crow was able to make the most of her second shot. She's now, of course, sitting on a 12-studio album career with over 50 million albums sold. And, of course, she built that persona herself. All right, coming in at number 6, I got a crazy one for you. It's Prince, the purple one, going as black as midnight. So Metallica's done it. Weezer's also done it. But man, Prince was the first to release a black album. And this lost and, found album, it's got an amazing story behind it. Back in the winter of 1987, the music industry witnessed one of its most expensive acts of self-sabotage when Prince demanded that Warner Brothers destroy 500,000 copies of his fully finished Funk Bible, the Black Album. This was just days before its scheduled release. Pallets of this fabled LP had already been loaded into trucks to ship out to retail stores, ready to go, but they were then unloaded and thrown into the industrial incinerators. They were burnt to a crisp. Reportedly, at Warner Brothers headquarters, executives went from office to office physically confiscating promo copies that had already been distributed to staff members. It was insane. But the question we need to ask or answer really is why? Well, as the story goes, Prince was in a pretty dark place when he wrote and recorded the Black Album. But just as it was getting ready to be released, the Purple Maestro had a hallucinogenic bad trip on MDMA. Now, he took this experience as a sign, a wake-up call. It led him to believe that the record he'd made was full on evil, and more specifically, that it was a vessel for a demonic entity he called Spooky Electric. Convinced that releasing such a dark, aggressive work would poison his soul and his legacy, Prince paid out of pocket to have the massive inventory destroyed altogether. Said Prince, "I suddenly realized that we can die at any moment and we'd be judged by the last thing we left behind." And he didn't want to tarnish the world with any bad vibes. Of course, copies of the Black Album did survive. About 50 German copies are believed to have been saved from the incinerator. And then in 2017, 5 pristine copies of the album were found inside a former Warner Brothers executive's closet. They were still in their original mailing envelopes. Who knows how many original copies survived the purge, but it's estimated that by the 90s, 1 million or more bootlegs of the album were in circulation. Ironically, by suppressing the record, Prince had created the ultimate bootleg holy grail of his entire catalog. Then fast forward to 1994, Warner released a limited 2-month run of Prince's Black Album. Prince begrudgingly allowed it as part of a contractual divorce settlement. This was during Prince's famous battle with Warner Brothers in the 90s when he took the symbol on and everyone started to call him the artist formerly known as Prince. Though Prince agreed to the release, he insisted the album received no promotion at all. He didn't want to draw any attention to it. From there, several 100,000 copies were sold. But get this, Warner was pissed that there were so many bootleg copies out there. They ran a full-page ad in Billboard magazine offering to give a free official 1994 copy to any fan who mailed in their illegal 1987 bootleg copy. Only thing is, the sound quality on the reissued version of the record was inferior to the original. So fans were better off keeping the bootlegs, plus they were more rare. If you want to hear the album today, like just about everything else, you can find it on YouTube. But just take Prince's wishes into consideration before you do that. All right, next up at number 5, I've got an insane chapter from the Foo Fighters story, a false start album that's been dubbed the $1 Million Demos. Coming into 2002, the Foo's roster, they'd already seen significant turnover there. Drummer William Goldsmith had come and gone, so had Pat Smear and Franz Stahl. The lineup finally seemed to be getting locked down, when they had Nate Mendel on bass and Taylor Hawkins on drums and Chris Shiflett on guitar. But now frontman and founder Dave Grohl, he was on the verge of bailing. Between March and July of 2002, Grohl put the Foos on the back burner to drum and record with Queens of the Stone Age, if you remember that. At the time, people began to wonder if this was it for the Foo Fighters. But the Stone Age decision, it didn't come out of nowhere. In early 2002, flush with cash and ambition, and hunkered down in LA's Conway Studios to follow up their 1999 LP, There's Nothing Left to Lose. The making of that album had been a pretty laid-back affair at that point, recorded in Dave's Virginia home basement. The making of the next album, it would be anything but laid back. And after months holed up in a high-end California studio, they'd burned through nearly $1 million and had almost nothing to show for it. Reportedly, the band recorded 11 tracks, but they all hated how they sounded. And what they sounded like was a band going through the motions, pretty much. Taylor Hawkins put it bluntly, nobody had their studio chops together at all, and so just like that, the sessions were done. The band had spent $1 million plus to make an album of demos that nobody wanted and nobody believed in, so they actually threw it in the trash and put the band on hiatus as Dave teamed up with the Queens. During the hiatus, though, the Foos gathered to play just one show. They played Coachella on April 28, 2002, and it was there that the tension finally exploded. Dave Grohl and Taylor Hawkins had a massive backstage blowout. Both were convinced the band was finished, but something strange happened when they took the stage that night. The anger-fueled adrenaline kicked into overdrive, and the band found that spark they've been missing for a long time. So the next month, Dave Grohl called up Taylor, and the two headed back to Dave's basement studio in Virginia, and they stripped their previously recorded tracks down to the bone, and they got to work. In about 10 days, they knocked out 14 tracks that would become One by One. And those $1 million demos transformed into an album that sold 1 million copies here in the US. If you're curious, one song made it onto One by One Untouched, Tired of You, featuring Brian May. I won't go getting tired of you. Everything else that was rebuilt from scratch. All My Life, Times Like These, Have It All. 2 leftover demos, Normal and Walking a Line, were polished up as B-sides, and that's what we have. It's times like these you learn to love again. Meanwhile, those original tapes became a curiosity for people who wanted everything that they'd ever put out. And for years, the Lost Album became a holy grail for Foo fans. All right, coming in number 4, I got Pink Floyd with their post-Dark Side of the Moon experiment, the Household Objects Project. This is one of rock's most bizarre, what the hell were they thinking moments for sure. Following the astronomical success of the Dark Side of the Moon, which would log a record-shattering 741 consecutive weeks on the Billboard 200 and eventually move over 50 million units, Pink Floyd, they found themselves creatively paralyzed and on a bizarre side quest to create an album composed entirely of non-instruments. Now, the idea was as simple as it was stupid. Replace their instruments with a long list of random items you could find around the house or in the garage or on the back-to-school aisle at the store, I guess. Pink Floyd may as well have been going back to school if they thought that this was what the rock world was clamoring for after such a huge album like Dark Side. The concept, that was primarily the brainchild of Roger Waters, who has certainly come up with better ideas. But the band pushed ahead with it because for the moment they couldn't come up with any better alternatives, or at least Roger couldn't. So kitchen drawers were raided. They got out the pots and pans. They used cardboard boxes for percussion. They captured the sounds of boiling kettles, and they even strummed on rubber bands. I heard a broomstick or two were used. I mean, the whole thing was insane. You got to give them points for creativity at least, but come on, it wasn't long before even the rest of the band thought that Roger Waters was nuts. Had the insanity of the Dark Side of the Moon caught up with the bassist? Here's what the other 3 band members said about the project over the course of it. Nick Mason said, in 1973, it took us 2 months to assemble slowly and laboriously what could now probably be achieved in an afternoon. We found the project was a brilliant device to postpone having to create anything concrete. Richard Wright would go on to say, I remember sitting down with Roger and saying, Roger, this is insane. A lot of the time it would just be like plonky noises. Ultimately, to me, personally, it became rather unsatisfying. And David Gilmour might have had the best comment. He said, after spending weeks trying to make cardboard boxes sound like a bass drum and a snare drum, you think, why don't we just use a bass drum and a snare drum? The project, of course, it went nowhere. It was scrapped in 1974. And this is one lost album that I'm glad never really materialized. Can you imagine this in any shape or form being better than Wish You Were Here? That's how you follow up The Dark Side of the Moon. How I wish you were here. Speaking of Wish You Were Here, though, I will say that one good thing that did come out of the household object sessions, if that's what they're called, wine glasses. The recordings of those plonky noises eventually birthed the iconic opening of Shine On You Crazy Diamond. So there is that. The project was a complete loss. But today, the Attempted Household Objects album stands as a testament to the fine line between genius and, yes, madness. Two things Pink Floyd were experts on, let's be clear. All right, coming in at number 3, I have a lost record that is actually a single song, and it would have been called Swan Song by the mighty Zeppelin. Swan Song is definitely the holy grail of lost Led Zeppelin tracks. It actually goes back to the creation of Physical Graffiti. Among the several songs that were worked on for this 83-minute powerhouse record was this anthemic track. The would-be epic. It could have been an all-time Zeppelin classic. Now, Jimmy Page took the lead on this one. He envisioned an ambitious instrumental piece with multiple movements and orchestration. Describing it, he said, and I quote, "I had a song called Swan Song, which was a whole piece with various different moves and moods. It had acoustic guitar, and then it went into like electric parts, and then back to acoustic parts." Most of this epic was still in the conceptual phase, though. But 2 of the track's instrumental sections were recorded in February '74, that much we know. Jimmy Page revealed that he had hoped to lengthen Swan Song with more movements, and he was thinking about having Robert Plant get behind the mic as well. But Swan Song didn't get too far off the ground, and Zeppelin, flush with a wealth of extraordinary material, decided to shelve Swan Song, and it was actually in favor of 10 Years Gone. That doesn't mean, though, that Jimmy Page wasn't above stripping the track for parts. According to the guitarist, one of Swan Song's guitar riffs made it into Kashmir during the sessions at Headley Grange. Swan Song showed up in other places as well. It showed up in Zeppelin's new record label launch on May of 1974. Said Page, "I've been recording this long instrumental and someone shouted, 'What's the title?' And I shouted back, 'Swan Song.' And everybody stopped and said what a great name that would be for the album." From there, it got carried over to being the name for our label. That was what he said. So there you go. But Jimmy Page never fully abandoned the idea of Swan Song and continued to fuse elements of this epic track with other songs. But after Bonham's death, Swan Song was left unfinished, though it was not forgotten. Jimmy Page continued to work on the track post-Zeppelin. During the 1983 Arms charity tour, he performed Bird on a Wing with Paul Rodgers, featuring chord structures reminiscent of Swan Song. And later, when Jimmy Page and Paul Rodgers formed The Firm, the piece evolved again, becoming Midnight Moonlight, a track that closed the band's 1985 debut album. You know, but all these years later, Swan Song, it still remains unfinished. But recently, Zeppelin has given us a little bit of hope. The most notable development occurred recently when Jimmy Page released a rare home demo related to that era. The 10 Years Gone home demo that came out in March of 2026. It's actually Jimmy Page put it up on social media and YouTube. Swan Song and 10 Years Gone, they're essentially sister tracks. Both are ambitious multi-section guitar orchestrations written at Page's home, his home studio actually, Plumpton Place, during the Physical Graffiti sessions. So you can always cross your fingers that Swan Song is coming. I mean, it's crazy. He writes this song, Swan Song, and he created like, 5, 6 other songs from it. Great songs. So I would love to hear the finished Swan Song. I hope we get it. That would be really cool. All right, we're just one away from our number 1 shot, and for the runner-up position, I got to go with The Who's Lost Follow-Up to Tommy. Number 2, I've got Lifehouse. Inspired by observations that Pete Townsend made about their audiences while touring Tommy, Lifehouse was supposed to be the ultimate sci-fi rock opera. I mean, Pete Townsend would say about it, "I've seen moments in Who gigs where the vibrations were becoming so pure, I thought the whole world was just going to stop. The whole thing was just becoming so unified." Very inspiring. Pete envisioned Lifehouse as a concept album about a dystopian future where rock and roll didn't actually exist. He saw that people lived in life suits fed by a government media grid, which, no rock and roll, government overreach, it hits a little too close to home right now. But there was truly hope in Townsend's scenario in the form of a rebel character who discovers the lost chord, a universal frequency capable of liberating the population and uniting them via a singular spiritual musical experience. Now, beyond the album itself, Pete Townsend wanted to go even further and turn Lifehouse into a massive multi-platform total media experience, his words. It would also be a feature-length science fiction film as well as a year-long experimental theater residency at the Young Vic, where the audience would be active participants in the Lifehouse method. Pete Townsend even imagined the concept as a primitive form of interactive software or a musical computer that could generate unique compositions for every human on Earth, effectively predicting the intersection of big data, the internet, and algorithms decades before they became a reality. Out here in the fields. But the thing is, the project was so complex that the rest of the Who, they couldn't understand it. And the stress of trying to explain it, that gave Pete a nervous breakdown. It nearly drove him to take his own life. Said Pete about it, and I quote, "The rest of the guys in the band having to endure my explanations of what, this whole thing was all about, they must have thought I'd gone completely mad. But they liked the songs." Now, ultimately, the project in its many phases was scrapped, and the leftover songs were salvaged for the 1971 album, Who's Next? Actually, 8 of the 9 songs on Who's Next were originally written and recorded for the Lost Lifehouse album. The only track on the album that wasn't Lifehouse related was bassist John Entwistle's My Wife. So yeah, famous cuts like Bob O'Reilly, Behind Blue Eyes, Even Won't Get Fooled Again, they were all originally designated for Lifehouse. Behind blue eyes. But beyond that, there were plenty more songs that didn't make it onto Who's Next. Pete Townsend originally wrote roughly 20 to 25 songs specifically for the Lifehouse narrative. Over the decades, these orphan Lifehouse tracks were scattered across Who rarities, collections like Odds and Sods. There's also Townsend's solo albums and later Who studio records, with many finally being reunited in the massive 2023 Who's Next Lifehouse Super Deluxe Edition. In 2023, that also saw the release of the Lifehouse graphic novel, a 172-page sci-fi epic that visualized Pete Townsend's sprawling concept. The project was co-written by Pete himself and was developed in collaboration with heavy metal magazine artist James Harvey. It was released as a centerpiece of the Who's Next Lifehouse Super Deluxe box set, serving as the definitive final version of the story. Really, really good story. I've got a copy. You should read it. I'll link to it below. Oh, yeah. It's only teenage wasteland. All right, it's time to reveal our Grand Pumbaa of Last Records. At the top spot, I got Brian Wilson's magnum opus. Never got a proper release. Talking about Smile. With Pet Sounds and Good Vibrations in the rearview mirror, Brian Wilson worked frantically on the next Beach Boys album throughout late 66 and early 67. It was initially dubbed Dumb Angel, and the project was renamed Smile later on. It promised to be an artistic leap beyond the already incomparable Pet Sounds. Let that sink in for a minute. Brian described it as a teenage symphony to God. For the project, he collaborated with lyricist Van Dyke Parks, an eccentric who shared Brian's visions of grandeur. But the album was fraught with delays and detours, and as it progressed, Brian grew increasingly erratic. He tore his house apart, he pitched an Arabian tent in the living room, and actually dumped 8 tons of beach sand into his dining room to create a sandy oasis, putting his piano in the middle of all that. Even in the studio, Brian was no less eccentric. For the fire section of the 4-part suite, The Elements, there are stories of Brian lighting bucket fires in the studio, to enhance the atmosphere. But then when a fire broke out near the LA recording studio where he was taping Fire, Brian Wilson became convinced his music was telepathically provoking God's wrath. By February of 1967, the pressure to pull the project together was mounting. It seemed that Brian and the Beach Boys were in a race with the Beatles to write the greatest record in history, a record that would take music to a whole new reality, new heights. The Beatles, they were hard at work on Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, and Brian, of course, deep into Smile, and everybody was wondering who would win the race. After Brian heard the Beatles' next release, Strawberry Fields Forever, he was shaken. He became convinced he could not compete with the Fab Four.
Take you down, 'cause I'm going.
So with his mental state deteriorating and his drug use escalating, Brian started to burn out. As the Smile sessions dragged on into the spring of 1967, Brian Wilson became confused about the direction of the album altogether. And after putting together 50 hours of recorded material, Brian Wilson pulled the plug. Sadly, Smile passed into legend, never receiving an official release. Tragically, the Smile project and Brian's relentless use of drugs destroyed his psyche, sending him into a decades-long downward spiral, is all you could say. Remnants of the project would emerge in various forms thereafter, including Heroes and Villains and the makeshift LP built from the Smile sessions, Smiley Smile from '67. Talks of finishing the Lost album, that would persist for years, including in 1972 when Carl Wilson announced the album's imminent release. But without Brian, it was a pipe dream. Skip ahead to 2004, Brian Wilson, Van Dyke Parks, and keyboardist Darian Sahanaja, they arranged a version of Smile for concert performances called Brian Wilson Presents Smile. This was adapted by Brian into a solo album, which was released on September 28, 2004.
My sunshine away.
Brian Wilson has said this version was significantly altered from his original vision. Brian Wilson Presents Smile, that peaked at number 13 on the Billboard 200. And from fall of 2004 to the summer of 2005, he supported it with a world tour. I was really fortunate to see a show in Seattle.
Who's loved by her mother?
And then in 2011, the compilation The Smile Sessions was the first official package devoted to the original Beach Boys recordings. It included an approximation of what the completed Smile album might have sounded like. But, we'll never know what might have happened if Brian had finished Smile, and especially had he put it out before Sgt. Pepper, if he would have beat them to the punch, the Beatles. Would it have changed the entire trajectory of the end of the 60s in music? Would it have topped the charts and been the perfect summation of art and commerce? What do you think? Let me know in the comments. I was able to talk with Brian about Smile and thank him for finishing it. Here's a little part of that conversation. Surf's Up. Let's talk about that track. That's my favorite.
Surf's Up is?
Yeah, my favorite
You really
song
like it?
of all time that you've ever done.
Surf's Up?
Yes.
Surf's up.
I have to disagree. I don't know. It's a good song, but it's too long. It just goes and goes and goes.
Have you shown love and mercy to you and your friends?
And then 37 years later, you got to release it.
Right.
And I got to tell you, Brian, this is the most anticipation I ever had for an album ever. Just a great, great record. Thank you for finishing this.
You're
Such a
very
beautiful,
welcome.
beautiful record.
Love and mercy to you and your friends tonight.
Well, there you have it. The great lost albums of all time in rock history. What do you think? Leave us a comment below and let us know, what are your favorite lost albums? What are your memories of these? Do you have any of these? Have you heard them? Let's have a great discussion. Black Album, Smile. I actually have a copy, a bootleg of Smile from way back in the day, and it's structured differently than when they released it in 2011. And man, I hope we get that Zeppelin song. Well, make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. We'd love to have you as part of our community. Make sure to get your tickets to Professor of Rock Live with John Fogerty. It's like inside the Actors Studio meets MTV Unplugged, an intimate evening of story and song. I'll be on the stage with Fogerty. It's on the evening of Friday, June 5th at the Wild Horse Pass in Phoenix, Arizona. Make sure to be there. Come talk to me after. I'd love to see you. Till next time, 3 chords and the truth, my friends.